30 here in Belém. I don't need to tell you why NDCs are so important, but I think there's been less focus about why nature is absolutely critical to helping us set and then implement and achieve these absolutely ambitious climate targets. Today, we're going to have a session that's going to focus on the link between NDCs and nature. We'll start with Rosalind Ajay. She is the REDD+ Forest Governance and Climate Policy Expert, Special Advisor to EDF, and former lead on forests for Ghana. We will then do a brief presentation and then hand it over to Kathy Lee, the Climate and Energy Lead for BirdLife International, to moderate our panel. We'll hear from Narelle Hill, who is Australia's Nature and Climate Lead, Muriel Leblon, who is the NDC Partnership Brazilian Co-Chair Coordinator. And then last but not least, we will hear from Juan Carlos Monterrey, who is the Special Representative from Climate Change for Panama. So with that, Rosalind, please, I'd invite you to come take to the stage.
Okay. Please, can you hear me? Maybe like this, huh? Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Awesome. It's quite a hot afternoon, so good to have you all here. And I believe that the Berlin COP is one that most of us have been looking forward to if you are a forest and nature lover. And finally to be here, I got in around 2 a.m. this morning, and already excited to be in all these different events. And particularly this one talking about the NDCs is very important. Many thanks to Chris, to Claudia for inviting me to be here. Please ignore the sweat. We will get through. But any conversation on the NDCs is important, particularly as we are celebrating 10 years after Paris, because the NDCs came in as the tool that will get us to a 1.5 degrees Celsius world that we've all been looking forward to. Currently, we are in the third iteration of NDCs. We've done NDCs 1, 2, and then now we are at 3. The science has proven the value that nature brings if we want to get to 1.3. The fact that 1.5, sorry, the fact that nature could really give us a third of the climate solutions we are looking for. So I don't really think that there is such a question on if nature is important. On the COP30 LinkedIn page, I realized that there had been some statistics provided on what NDCs are looking like, and I want to just share a few of those. One is the fact that 84% of NDCs currently include forests. 78% feature oceans. 89% plan to use Article 6. And 97% of NDCs all mention the need for international cooperation and support. Now, I want to take this one by one. So, if 84 countries or NDCs are featuring forests, that's a big milestone. When I started talking about forests and NDCs or nature and NDCs, that was a while back, and it was still a gray area. So this shows that we've come a long way. Probably the question is, what is the coverage of that 84 in terms of volume? What does it mean to have 84 NDCs? Is it 1/10 of the NDC, 1/20th? What is really the volume? And then the other part of it is the 97% that is talking about the need for international cooperation and support. I mean, everywhere in every COP conversation, finance is key, because if we can't deliver finance, we are not going to get to see the actions that we have so beautifully put on paper. So we need finance, we need cooperation. And then 89% plan to use Article 6. Now, this is where it gets very exciting, because Article 6 can really deliver the finance that we are looking for, whether 6.2 or 6.4. But who is leading the conversation on 6.2 or 6.4? I think it's very important that we look at, because at the moment, and I want to use Ghana as a case study. Ghana has, and probably was one of the very first countries to sign a 6.2 agreement with Switzerland. We also have an agreement with Singapore, I think with Sweden coming up, and some South Korea also. Now, in all these 6.2 agreements, there is nothing really on jurisdictional REDD+. It doesn't hold any big space for nature. Only Singapore talks about REDD+, but it's at a project level. So even though 6.2 has opened up and we say that nature features in Ghana's NDCs, and we need international cooperation, and Article 6 can deliver that, it's not featuring in 6.2. Now to 6.4, and I'm sure that most of us here know about the conversation going on 6.4, and how if we are not careful, the permanent standards and the monitoring regimes can just kick out nature and forests. So is it enough to have forest in our NDCs or nature in our NDCs when we are not driving the instruments that would help us achieve the scale of impact that forest and nature can give? And again, the question will be, for example, again, I go back to Ghana because I work so much in that space. In the REDD+ space, Ghana has been able to deliver results that are so tangible. We have received 2 payments from the FCPF for verified emission reductions. The question is, why wouldn't anybody entering into a 6.2 engagement be interested in leveraging on the very sector that is generating results? Because recently, the first ITMO transfer that the country did was just 11,000. If you compare 11,000 to the millions of emission reductions that forests can deliver, there's a big puzzle here, and we need to solve that puzzle. And that's what I'm hoping, that really in Belém, as we have these conversations, we are talking about NDCs, we are able to drive home the pieces that will get the action to work. Because it's not enough to have forest and nature feature in the NDCs if we don't have the financial architecture and mechanism really to make them work, make them exciting, and make them attractive. Because for the many years that I worked on forests, I believe it's the single sector that brings everything together. If you talk about an integrated forest management approach, you're talking about addressing agriculture, talking about addressing energy, addressing issues with water. So really, if you have forests as a pivot, you can have many other sectors rally around it, and then you're able to solve diverse issues in any forest landscape. So I hope that this event goes as planned. I hope that it's not just an event. The outcomes here are going to feature into the big conversations that we are going to have. And really, we finance NDCs to achieve the ambition that we want them to achieve. Nature in NDCs means ambition, and we must drive the finance to achieve that ambition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So can you still hear me? Excellent. So thank you, Rosin. I think that set us up perfectly to talk about the 2035 NDCs and what we're seeing both on the ambition front and on the nature front. So as we all know, the Global Stocktake decision in 2023 encouraged all parties to submit NDCs that are ambitious, economy-wide. That includes all ecosystems, all sources and sinks. Full economy reduction targets covering all greenhouse gases, and aligned with limiting global warming to a 1.5 degree future. So we all know, and there's been a big focus of discussion here, that the NDC synthesis report shows a big gap in the ambition that we need collectively to put ourselves on a 1.5 degree future. But there's some good news. We also show that more than 50 NDCs are aligned with both the Global Stocktake outcome and with a credible path to net zero in that country. So you have more than 50 NDCs representing 35% of the global economy that are on that trajectory that we need to see to keep our climate safer, to keep ourselves on the pathway that we need. These NDCs all include AFLU. So we've already seen our land sector, our ecosystems, our oceans, our productive sectors coming into these ambitious climate targets. We also know that across the board, we're seeing a significant increase in focus on nature-based solutions in the NDCs. We're seeing this both in mitigation and in adaptation. We're seeing more inclusive nature-based solutions with a greater focus on gender, on Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we're seeing more ecosystems being included within the policies and measures wrapped up in these NDCs with smarter targets. So there's been a real evolution over time in the quality of the NDCs and in how nature-based solutions are reflected. Oh, my animation didn't work. Well, you get the surprise first. But as you see, and Rosalind touched on some of these targets, 89% of parties communicated these economy-wide targets. 36% included nature and ecosystem-based approaches, so more than a third of countries. Of the developing country parties that have submitted before September 30th, when the synthesis report was done, about a third reported implementing REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and that's at a national or subnational level. Rosalind talked about jurisdictional REDD+. 78% included at least one reference to the ocean, so we're seeing an increasing focus on oceans within NDCs. Almost a third included the conservation or restoration of high carbon wetlands, including peatlands. And 23% referred to agroforestry, so really looking at nature-based solutions in the productive space as well as in the conservation space. We've gone through and looked as well at the mentions of nature by sector, by ecosystem, and looked at which countries had the greatest focus on nature. So as you can see, countries like Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Vanuatu, Morocco, Sao Tome really included a strong focus on nature in the narrative of their target. It doesn't mean that other countries had less of a focus in the target themselves. Again, economy-wide targets include this, but in the narrative and when they talked about how they were going to implement and achieve their NDCs, this was a key feature. Forests were the most frequently mentioned, perhaps not surprising. There's been a lot of work on forests in this process, but we are seeing that other biomes are less of a focus in the narrative and in the documents. And perhaps as we move into implementation, will require more attention to really be thoughtful about how we implement the solutions we need. And then if we turn to the NDCs supported through the UN Climate Promise and submitted to date, we're seeing that 39% included direct reference to their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Almost every one of these NDCs highlighted the role of nature and nature-based solutions in climate action or alignment with the CBD. At least 19 refer to the UNCCD, the UN Convention on Combating Desertification, the third Rio Convention. And almost all of those, an equal number almost mentioned desertification and land degradation. And then I think very positively, a growing number of NDCs are really focusing on, as they move into implementation, how do they harmonize these activities on the ground? How do they think through the integration of activities of investment and finance? How do we look to make sure that more than one goal is accomplished as we think about our strategies, our activities on the ground? So looking very quickly at NBSAPs, which aren't the focus of today's presentation, but we also know that there is an equal growing attention coming from a biodiversity lens to focus on climate change within that convention as well. And there's been a number of countries that have been key leads on this topic. I'm going to skip through these two just for a lack of time, but I did want to take a bit of time to focus on implementation and how, as we move from the target setting and the submission of documents to actually achieving these ambitious NDCs, the opportunities that we're seeing to really integrate nature-based solutions into NDC implementation. So we're looking at a growing focus on including all of society and whole of government within NDC implementation and investment. So it's not just the environment ministry, it's not just the energy ministry, but is the forestry ministry at the table? Is the planning ministry on the table? Is the investment bank at the table? Who is there? Agriculture, and making sure that they're all part of the design of these solutions. We're looking again, as we talked about, economy-wide targets. But once you do that, countries are starting to say, what do I expect each sector to contribute to my overall target? How do I expect to draw on each one? And really devolving those down to sectoral policies, sectoral strategies and plans in a way that allows a lot more granularity. We're seeing an increase in data quality, in transparency and MRV, and you're seeing that in the first reports under the Paris Agreement framework. But that also gives us this real opportunity to draw on the best data that may not always be in our traditional climate sources. So the greenhouse gas inventories have the opportunity, for example, to bring in RED plus MRV, which sometimes is much more granular, to look at other sources of agricultural inventories, of estimates coming out of mangroves and wetlands at a project level, but where we're refining emissions factors. So there's this real need to think about the different data sources we have and how they feed into our planning and our implementation. And then again, really thinking about how to mainstream nature-based solutions across the entire economy. So not just the obvious sectors, the obvious approaches, but infrastructure, investment planning, urban development design, education, buildings, and you're starting to see these conversations start up in different places. So I think that's really positive. The bottom of my slide is somehow not on the screen, but when you move to implementation too, again, you're really seeing this not only in the planning stage, but as parties get down to the level and start to implement their strategies and action plans, we're seeing this really hit the ground. So I think it's a very quick run through, but there's been a huge implementation, not only in the shape and form and ambition of our targets, but in how countries are starting to think through with their stakeholders the actual implementation of these targets. And I think that's, for this community, the real opportunity over the next 10 years to focus on how we embed nature-based solutions throughout the implementation strategies. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I will move it back to the title slide, Kathy, as I welcome you up.
Audio check. I believe everyone can hear us okay. Do let me know if at any point our audio drops. Great. Well, I think that was one of the best NDC presentations I've ever heard of on nature. So shout out to Chris, who does not have her headset on, so she can't actually hear all these nice words. But nevertheless, welcome to our incredible panel. I'm Kathy, the moderator for the panel. I lead BirdLife's global climate policy and energy policy, and also having the pleasure of being in this lovely convention since I was a teenager. And just a one-liner about BirdLife. BirdLife is an international partnership in 119 countries. For example, in the US, it's Audubon, where Chris currently works. And all our partnerships focus with 30 people on the ground serving as negotiators, as activists, as NBS practitioners, is really about linking local action to national planning and global policy that's synergistic across climate, nature, land, and people. So without further ado, this panel is really about sharing lessons learned and practical examples about increasing ambition through nature-based solutions, as well as opportunities for enhanced implementation and collaboration. So I'll pass the floor to each and one of you for a quick introduction of yourselves, but also why does your government or organization think that it's critical and possible to increase both mitigation and adaptation ambition with nature-based solutions in this round of NDCs. So Narelle, over to you first.
Thank you, Kathy. It is wonderful to be here. I am very privileged to be on this panel with some very esteemed, if not quite sweaty panelists. I'm sure that we're all bonding over how much we have been sweating these last couple of days. My name is Narelle Hill. I am the Australian Climate Nature Lead in our international climate area. So ultimately, I was so pleased to hear from Rosalind and also Chris before seeing the slides and looking at the references to forest growing, to oceans growing, and then being able to sit in that chair and tick off mentally in my head, being like, in our NDC, we did this, we did this, we did this. And ultimately, I think what has changed in recent years in terms of at least how the Australian government has been thinking about our NDC 3.0, which has, our 2035 target of 62 to 70% reduction on 2005 emissions, which we see as ambitious and credible. We are listening to civil society and the best available science, which is telling us how connected biodiversity, land management, and climate change fundamentally are. And that has enabled us to kind of elevate these core pieces of work that we have been doing within the Australian government, but really frontlining them within our NDC. So for instance, our nature repair market and how that works with our domestic carbon market, we are now able to, encourage private investors to be delivering projects on the ground that benefit biodiversity and carbon on the same activity. So we are layering on those benefits. And within the last month, we've had the first instance of that. So we're seeing, on agricultural land, these benefits coming to life, and we're so excited by that. And then in terms of our renewable energy transition, we know that comes with tensions and trade-offs, but we need to be protecting our biodiversity as much as we feasibly can. So we have been developing up our renewables environmental research initiative, where we're bringing together partners from government, civil society, academia, so that we can identify how we can best protect our sensitive environments and species as we go about achieving net zero by 2050. Very pleased to be here. Thank you all.
Awesome. And personally, being coordinator of two of the Rary projects, it's super cool, and I'm sure lots of you will see the end or interim products of some of these 43 projects in the coming months. Rosalind, you already introduced yourself, so tell us more about why do you think it's so critical?
So thank you very much. And so I probably go back to what most of us know. And I think that sometimes in these conversations, we lose fact of why we are gathering. Not that we lose, but probably the entirety of it, because we are solving a climate problem. And in every problem-solving situation, you need to do your diagnostics. What particularly are you solving? And how can you solve it? And the science has proven that we have an opportunity to solve this climate problem, 30% of it, which is quite phenomenal, with nature and nature-based solutions. So the question is, if we really want to solve this problem, and we have 30% of the solution proven, not just by independent scientists, but also even the IPCC that we all rely on has mentioned this. Why don't we prioritize that? So in the work that Ghana did, this was one starting point of the priority and the essence. Now, secondly, it was also to understand what our landscape is. The fact that we have key commodities that have the opportunity to become the very triggers for further deforestation and destruction of the very nature that we are presenting as a solution. Because Ghana has cocoa, we have timber, we have gold, and we have seen firsthand how unsustainable practices are destroying the extraction of these resources. We can have pathways where they are extracted, but in a sustainable manner, to still feed the economy, because we are a growing economy, and I believe that's what a lot of developing economies are doing. But then this must be done responding to the global situation at hand. The third point is the fact that, the whole conversation, and I want to narrow down on REDD+, had started a long time. And so if you get into the architecture, the frameworks, and Chris mentioned this in her presentation, MRV set up, safeguards, set up, grievance and redress mechanisms. It's really like a clear path where other sectors can even learn from. How has nature done it? How has REDD+ done it? How can we learn from this as we expand our suite of NDC actions? Because it's very important that in a particular country, if one sector is doing well, we are able to leverage on the gains there into the other sectors. So that is also the third point. And then ultimately, NDCs are about partnerships, and we are in the NDC partnership. When you want to have a conversation where you have an attractive point for other players, partners to come on board. So what is it that for a country like Ghana, regarding nature, for mitigation and adaptation, can attract other partners? We have cocoa, already it's attracting private sector, and we need that collaboration and private finance. We need blended finance to actually make NDCs work. So if we put that foot in, then that becomes an entry point for us to engage these other partners to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. And let me introduce myself. I'm Muriel Bon. I'm the co-chair coordinator in the NDC partnership. I'm supporting Brazil. There are two co-chairs every couple of years. And there's a developing country this year is Brazil. And we are joined by Denmark. And soon it will be Australia who will be co-chairing the NDC partnership. So thank you for being here. It's a pleasure for us to host this event. because we all know that nature-based solutions and biodiversity conservation and sustainability are critical to achieving the climate goals. And for us, for the NDC partnership, we can see the member countries and organizations are increasingly requesting support on this. So it is not, there's no doubt that this is a very important subject that we should all be paying more attention to. And let me tell you about it. Well, you can see around, but the NDC partnership, we have 250 members, in which 140 are countries and 110 are institutions. And we connect developing countries, exactly what you were mentioning before. Developing countries NDC implementation needs and tailor package on knowledge, on technical assistance and funding also to match those needs with the developed countries who can support funding. So it's a vision that we have as a partnership, and there's obviously a big gap in between what is needed, which is increasing, and what is available, right? So for us, one example of the demanding and the increase in demand is that 103 member countries are requesting partnership support. 77 of them, which is 75%, are seeking biodiversity aligned assistance. And 87 countries need desertification aligned support. These are other examples. And yet, only 40% of the requests on nature, biodiversity, and desertification, as well as was mentioned before, receive support. So there is definitely a gap, and much more needs to be done. So I'll just start with this, just to start the conversation.
Wow, incredible stats. Building on that, I think that leads perfectly into our next question around what are some of the institutional challenges of aligning the 2035 round of NDCs with other national planning, namely NBSAP that's already mentioned, as well as land degradation neutrality targets, as well as many other national planning. How do we foster synergies and maximize efficiency and reporting and avoid burdens? And also welcome our panelists to share any practical examples or methods or tools that you used that you found particularly helpful.
Thanks, Kathy. And I just want to test, can everyone hear me as I'm okay? Wonderful. I think we're having some buzzing up on the stage. So just to reiterate, your question was around practical ways of supporting synergies between NDCs, NBSAPs, and so on and so forth. And any challenges. Okay, yeah, absolutely. So within the context of Australia, 4 years ago, the department that I work for, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, did not exist. So it came into fruition very recently, bringing together a range of different policy areas and expertise who weren't necessarily, often in contact with one another. So I think over the recent years, the strength of having these experts co-located and able to interact with one another has really begun to pay off. So I think there's an organizational kind of institutional element that I think is really valuable for folks to consider. And then also one of the things that one of the things that we have started to do, because we knew that the alignment of when we would release our NBSAP and then subsequently our NDC, they were quite aligned and it was quite a unique opportunity. We started convening a monthly round table effectively between a range of our experts who were developing up these national documents, these national strategies and action plans. So that meant that we were able to, track progress, see where difficulties were emerging in one area, potentially move those into another more appropriate document, for instance. So you'll see that we speak to our adaptation plan. We know that a lot of people want to see adaptation measures included in NDCs. While that wasn't possible for us, we could then, expand upon that in a related document, and we also have building resilience within our NBSAP. And effectively, what we're really hoping to have done by making these connections, building these relationships, is that when we get to the implementation phase, which is beginning now, these relationships will continue, and then we will be able to essentially, as we start to do these projects on ground, we know who our experts are. They can feed into the respective processes so that we actually minimize those tensions and trade-offs that I think everyone in this room understands we have. Thank you.
Incredible, and I think Australian government is definitely one of the best from my personal work experience in terms of internal coordination and collaboration. Hence why sometimes I send emails to multiple NRLs and multiple colleagues, because we work so closely on climate, nature, energy, migratory species, wetlands, a lot of these issues, and you're so joined up. So apologize that sometimes I send email to a bunch of you in the same email chain. That's a good thing though. Rosalind, over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. And I wish every country were as organized as Narelle has really painted that picture, or given us that picture. Because to the question that you asked, it's really about coordination. So if you have a central coordination, then you're able to fit the different pieces, because all these documents are responding, if you ask me, basically to the same things. They just have different names, and at one point in time or the other. Because what NBSAPs are doing, really NDCs are also doing. Probably one is focusing more on just a biodiversity angle, which of course must also integrate into what other sectors are doing. And if we're able to address that, that will be one of the biggest challenges that is addressed, and then paves the way for coordinated implementation. The next thing I want to talk about is about what gets into each of these documents. I think that's also an area where we normally have challenges, aside who is leading and how coordinated it is. So the question is, what would you want to report in your NBSAP against what do you want to report in your NDCs? And which sector is doing that? Because I'm just coming from an event, and there was a proposal by a panel member that the Ministries of Environment and Natural Resources must be speaking with the Ministries of Finance in the different countries that we find ourselves. Because for all of these documents, it comes back to financing the actions in there. And so what actions you put in there largely define who wants to finance. And I want to give an example. When Ghana was preparing, I think, right from NDC 1.0, we knew that wildfires were an issue. But we couldn't really put them in there the extent to which we had to, because one, data was missing on the full extent of wildfires and their emissions. Some of the calculations that we did, the emission numbers looked so huge that some stakeholders said, well, take this out, because once you put it in there, that's going to consume all the funding that we're able to receive, or any financing that we can be able to generate. So the kind of actions that we want to put in these different documents have financial implications. And I believe that's the very aspect also that becomes a challenge in the implementation of it. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the approach. Even if we don't have a central coordinated entity, the approach to designing these documents can help. Now, not every country might be where Australia is, but in Ghana, what I know the Ministry of Environment does is to have working groups. So every sector has its working group, and that working group feeds into the document. Now, the working group's approach is very good, but then you need some level of capacity amongst all the working group members. Because if you must work in a group, you must have some central point where you all have the same understanding. I believe that that's one of the aspects that if we're able to solve going forward, that we build capacity on why these documents are being developed, not just because there is NDC 3.0 or NDC 2035, and so the Ministry of Environment must churn this out, but we are developing these documents to solve issues that are urgent issues that have brought us all together in all these different circumstances, in these journeys where we are traveling across the entire world to solve. Thank you.
Incredible. Muriel, over to you.
Sure. Let me bring an example for our co-chair, Brazil. Brazil has, going back to what you just mentioned about the need of coordination, and the link, the famous link between environment ministries and ministries of finance, right? So Brazil took a leadership role on this because the climate and ecological transformation investment platform that they have created, they bring together a whole of government approach to it. It's led by the Ministry of Finance, but I've seen firsthand that they work directly with the Ministry of Environment and also environment, climate change, and development industry and commerce and services, and mines and energy as well. So this platform expands investments in ecological transformation, for example, and toward decarbonization, sustainable resource use, and improved quality of life. At the same time, it's supporting the ecological transformation plan and the climate transition across the sectors. So this is a good example. It's not just on paper, it's something, and the co-chair and leadership of Brazil, for example, in the beginning it was from the Ministry of Environment, Anatoni, the president of the COP30. But at some point, because the COP was coming, it was so much work for the leadership of Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance came and became the representative in the co-chair of the NDC partnership. So this is a great sign. A female secretary from finance from Brazil leading all this, and the carbon market is something very interesting that she's also leading. That's something to have a look at. From our side in the NDC partnership, there's been a call for support, and we mobilized 40 different partners and 78 millions to support 90 countries in NDC development. And from that, we have noticed that 74%, they're referencing already the Global Biodiversity Framework, and 44 are aligned with the UNCCD. So you do have, 74% would they broaden the adaptation coverage, increasing linking in national development goals, etc. So there's a lot that can be done, and the countries are definitely seeing the need to align this and to work in a more coordination fashion. No?
Incredible. Now we also have Juan joining us on stage. But before passing you to remarks, final question for our three panelists is, now we talked about the broader context and the challenges. In terms of opportunities, would love to hear from you any particular opportunities that you want to highlight. Of course, there's so many around integrating NBS into NDC with a particular focus on the implementation of it, whether it's finance or institutional partnerships, reporting, efficiency, and I think using Australia as an example, our colleagues from the BirdLife Partnership are launching this week in Australia the AVE Step 2, which is around avian sensitivity mapping for energy infrastructure planning, supported by ADB and private sector in Australia. So I'm sure there are so many other examples. So Nora, over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. I think just in terms of how you've asked that question, I think you've touched upon all of the kind of key things that are front of mind for countries when they're thinking about this integration. Obviously, data harmonization in terms of how we report on these national strategies and action plans is very front of mind, particularly for parties that do have kind of capacity and time constraints, resource constraints. I guess one of the opportunities that I see that is kind of reframing a current challenge is that I think in the narrative that we hear about, bringing nature and climate action together, often what we do hear about is the losses if we don't undertake this course of action. So I've got a couple of stats up here, and I just like to directly quote them. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the IPBES Nexus assessment, which is more expansive than biodiversity and climate change alone. It also includes water, health, and a range and food systems. But if we wait 10 years to undertake a Nexus approach, it doubles the cost of addressing biodiversity loss. It adds $500 million per year for climate action. And ultimately, we would have siloed approaches that are costing us $10 to $25 trillion a year into the future. And I don't know of any government, any organization that can bear that cost. So I think ultimately we've been thinking about this as losses that are coming in the future, rather than looking at this being impacting our budget as it stands year on year. And I also think that one of the ways that these kinds of messages can resonate with organizations and governments more is actually switching that conversation and talking about savings, what you are gaining from this conversation, and bringing it immediately into the present rather than 10 years from now, 15 years from now. What is happening to your within your national financing system next year? 2 years from now, how much is this costing you? How much can you save by undertaking a climate nature nexus approach? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. To add to what Narelle just mentioned, I believe that we have the opportunity to really be very reflective on why we are doing these different documents, or we are preparing NDC 2035 or whatever document it is. You know, there's a way that you can just keep moving and moving and moving because we're in a moving track. But at some point in time, you just need to pause and ask yourself, why are we even moving? And are we moving at a pace that is expected? Can we move faster? What kind of opportunities are available for us? Now, a number of countries that put in NBS in their NDCs have already made gains. Can we take stock of that? What do these gains translate into the lives of particularly indigenous people and local communities in forest areas? What does it mean for their culture, their identity? What does it mean for their livelihoods in terms of what they wake up every day to? What does it mean for the whole cycle of the economic situation of these countries? Now, once we're able to do these reflections, then we better understand that when we put NBS into NDCs, we're not just putting them there because they are solutions, but we are putting them there because they are solutions that really get to the core of what life itself means. I have said recently that, we all came to meet nature, and every life that we have is really borrowed from nature. It's really borrowed from nature. And so if you're borrowing life, you have to pay back the right way because it's borrowed. You don't have it. And if you're able to reflect and get to this point, then you really understand that we need to have NBS financed in NDCs. It's not enough to just put them there, but we need to finance them. And we have an opportunity with countries that have already done this and it's working, and we can learn and scale. Thank you.
That's very well put. And I think it's also incredible to see that there's already so much progress. Can people still hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I think there's already so much progress and so many ongoing initiatives on NDC implementation and other implementations synergistically. And using, again, our partnership as an example, we just signed an MOU with World Bank convening the Africa-Eurasia Flyway Initiative on climate, nature, energy nexus, mobilizing a few billions in those regions. And in the Americas, we have we co-convene the Americas Flyways Initiative together with Audubon and CAF, the Development Bank for Latin America and Caribbean, is also mobilizing a few billions in the region, and now there are already pilot projects underway. And in Asia, we co-convene the Regional Flyways Initiative with ADB, also in Asia and Pacific. So over to you, Mariel, to share your thoughts. I think it's really incredible to see all the great work by NDC Partnership in supporting the update, but also the implementation of NDCs.
Thank you. No, I'm so glad that you just mentioned the importance of what happens after we have the plans, we have the papers, because the NDC partnership just is finalized the new program for the next 6 years, the work plan of the partnership. And the focus is implementation, because it's not just the building blocks. As you can see, we talk about creating the ecosystem in the countries for them to be able to develop the NDCs. But eventually, we like talking about cooperation on how to make this a reality, right? How can we learn from each other? The knowledge sharing is vital, right? So what we learn from one country, you can replicate in your country, and the realities are very, very. So I think that in that sense, going back to your first question, we do have the alignment with the Rio Convention, right? That to create this efficient support ecosystem, we enable the countries to develop the aligned strategies and access finance more effectively. So for that, we are committed to the NBSAP, Accelerated Partnership, and the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, the UNCCD Global Mechanism, and other initiatives. So these are important for us to be connected and make sure that we are really supporting, and this all makes sense for the countries and for the people directly in the implementation. Thank you.
Incredible. And with that, I'll pass the floor to Juan, who's the special representative on climate change of Panama. And I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard you speak in the past few days around the incredible nature pledge of Panama and all the fantastic work that you and the government is doing. And then personally, I'm looking forward to be at CRIC after COP30. So a fun time ahead. And I'll let you fix your pin. But with that, I'll pass the floor to you for remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Boa tarde. So this COP has been named the COP of Truth. So I would like to focus my remarks on a few truths that we all need to internalize in order to keep moving forward. The truth is, number one, that 32 years ago, we built a fragmented system at the international level. We built the Rio Conventions because we knew we needed to tackle the climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity, and the degradation of land and soil. However, that international fragmentation permeated all the way down to the national and domestic structures that we have. The focal points for climate, biodiversity, land degradation are all spread out, sometimes within one ministry, most times across several different ministries. And we know, number three, how human behavior is. When humans have just a little bit of power, when they have a little bit of everything, they guard it until the last minute, until the last fight. And this is what has been happening. The climate focal point has been on this corner, getting all the climate funding, doing all the climate work, sort of like overcrowding the entire space because the climate convention became sort of like the most popular, famous child of the three conventions. Then you have the resentful focal point on biodiversity, the resentful focal point on the certification, complaining about how everything goes to climate, but no one comes to the table to talk and actually be like, okay, the climate space have this big pot of money. How can we all use this money to benefit all the fights that we're engaging in as one nation? So in order to destroy these silos, the Minister of Environment, Juan Carlos Navarro, created what we have now as the Office of the Special Representative. So instead of having separate focal points across environmental conventions, I am the focal point to a bunch of conventions, and then we have operational focal points. My main role is to bring everybody to the table. My main role is to build a both international and domestic strategy that takes into consideration everything that we need to take into consideration to fight for people and to fight for nature. The first output of this pilot exercise is what we call the Nature Pledge. The Nature Pledge is the compilation of our climate, our biodiversity, or the certification, our plastics and ocean protection commitments into just one document instead of 5 separate documents. There are more than 17 environmental and health conventions in the multilateral system. For each one of these conventions, we need to produce at least 3 different reports in a period of 5 years. The math is very simple. 3 times 15, that is 45 reports that ministers of environment, that bureaucrats like me need to produce. Some of these reports can cost you all the way up to $3 million. For example, if we talk about the climate targets and the massive mobilization that you need to build to get there. Let's assume they only cost $500,000 each. That is at least $20 million that go to international consultants, that go to international firms, and that do not go to conservation, they do not go to restoration, they do not go to the protection of the oceans. And most of these reports don't talk to each other. When we took the climate office and we started to analyze what reports Panama has submitted, the targets for restoration were completely different across the climate document, across the biodiversity document, across the certification document. On top of that, the Ministry of Agriculture had a completely different target, and the big question was, how does the 50,000 hectares in the NDC talk to the 200,000 hectares at the Agricultural Department, talk to the 75,000 hectares of the Desertification Convention? Do they relate? Are some of them part of the other bigger one? To this day, we still don't know. That's why we built a new target, which is the restoration of 100,000 hectares in a period of 10 years. And with that macro goal, we're going to be reporting to all conventions in just one document our targets. The next step that we're taking is that our BTR process, we're going to use it to turn it into the nature transparency process. So on top of climate, we're also going to be bringing everything that we need to report on biodiversity, everything that we need to report on the certification, everything that we need to report on oceans. The Nature Pledge is going to be up on the websites of the Secretariat this week. It is not up because I'm very picky with the images and the design. So I have been playing with it for the past 2 weeks, but the technical team already finished its work. And my message is very simple. Time is running out. Money is running out. We need to find new, creative, simplified ways for actions. And also, combining all these reports into one allows for the private sector to actually understand what the heck we want to do. It allows for international partners to actually understand where we want to put Panama in the next 10 years. After we finish this internal process, we are seeking for partners to launch a community of practice so that other countries can also learn how we did it in Panama. And guess what? It was not easy. You will not be surprised to know that I am not the most loved person in my ministry. The first barrier that I faced was my own technical team who told me this is not possible, we cannot do it. Then the teams in the other departments said this is not possible, we cannot do it. But we had one political line from the president because this was included in the presidential government plan. That kind of helps when your president says, I want it done this way. And that's the vision that we have been pushing, and that is the vision that we bring in here to COP. The voice of reason, simplicity, cut the BS, cut the red tape. It's time to act. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I'll pass it on to Chris to close us off. And Juan, you arrived just after her incredible presentation, so you might want to steal some of her background slides in the presentation.
Can you hear me again? Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I think hopefully you've got a really good sense not only of where we are in terms of the data, but a really critical sense on why this is important. The science tells us why, but you're hearing from key countries on how they've interpreted it, how they're doing this, how this is helping not only with climate ambition, but with the biodiversity crisis, with the budgetary crisis, with social buy-in. So I think the answer is pretty clear. Nature is part of NDCs. NDCs will depend on nature, and you're seeing immense progress. So I hope this inspires you for the rest of COP. This is COP in the Amazon. This is the Nature COP. And I think everybody at this place is here and committed and moving forward together. So thank you for that. Thank you to each of our panelists for a really inspiring session. And we hope it leads you forward for the rest of week 2. Cheers. Oh, and I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning, so I'll do it at the very end. I'm Chris Drax. I'm Managing Director of Global Policy for National Audubon Society. Thanks to everybody. Bye. Introduce myself.